Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and the oh-so-creepy and spooky neighborhood of Reedville. We are celebrating a week of Halloween. Today, our guest is Josh Roberts. He is the author of The Witches of Willow Cove, and you are not going to believe where he grew up. Before we invite our spooky middle grade friend in to celebrate Halloween, we need to celebrate a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read. That's right, we have a brand new certified great read, Alley Cat and the Tournament Tuesday by Allison Footy Bork. It is a fabulous book. It is Tournament Tuesday for Alley Cat and her little brother Bugsy. Bugsy is oh so excited to play with his lucky golf ball. He thinks the ball helped him win the race against his sister and that it helps him with his golf game. He won't leave for the golf course without his lucky golf ball. His mother tries to explain to Bugsy that it is not luck at all that will help him with the game, but it is his hard work and practice which will help make him a better player. When Bugsy enters a golf course, he is counting on his good luck to help him with the game, win the game. But is luck the only thing that matters? It's only when Alley Cat forgets to bring his lucky ball that Bugsy learns that success comes from his smarts, practice, and hard work. We really love this book, and we think it would be a great addition to any family library. Check it out today, our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read, a new book in the Alley Cat series, Alley Cat and the Tournament Tuesday by Allison Footy Bork. Oh, it is a wonderful Halloween week here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're so excited to introduce our next guest, coming to you from right outside of like a Halloween headquarters at Salem, Massachusetts. Our guest today is celebrating his brand new middle grade novel, The Witches of Willow Cove. Please welcome to the show, Josh Roberts. Josh, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Anybody who's not familiar, people probably are familiar with the Salem Witch trials and that horrible period of time. But Salem, Massachusetts is one of the funkiest, weirdest places in the month of October. Probably not this year because of the pandemic, but for folks who haven't been there and experienced it, Josh, before we get into the book, tell us what it's like to be around Salem at this time of year.
It's madness. It's mayhem. It's awesome. It's so cool. Everything. I feel like Halloween starts in early September around here, and it's every house is decorated, and all the stores and shops and restaurants and everything. It's Halloween headquarters in the USA here. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. In the streets of Salem, downtown Salem, where all the House of Seven Gables and the witch trials happened. It's just it feels like Times Square, like a mini Times Square. The streets are just packed, and people are dressed in you see everything. It's just insane. I saw there was a car parked with a deer inside the back seat of the car. I don't know. It's just
the best thing is, the train coming in from Boston to Salem on any weekend in October, starting around 5:00. It's like a party train with half the people are commuters coming home from work and the other half are in costumes. And, I sat next to a vampire one time, and it's crazy. Great.
So it's not surprising that you are a spooky middle grade author.
No, this is something that I love. Growing up around here in New England, I was always into Halloween and the sort of the history of the witch trials. I also grew up in a Victorian funeral home, a working funeral home, so I had that to my resume as well. So definitely felt like my life experience prepared me for writing this story.
Now, a working Victorian funeral home.
That's right. So my dad, my family is 6 generations of funeral directors, and my dad was the last generation. None of his kids went on to do it, but we lived in the funeral home, and where the funerals and wakes were held. And starting in around high school, I would help out parking cars, escorting people to and from the services and that sort of thing.
I gotta ask, what's it like living in a house where your house guests are not quite as animated as a typical house guest might be?
I didn't even realize that it was a little strange until I was probably in middle school, because it was just all I'd ever known. But then when you have friends sleep over and they have to go home in the middle of the night because they're too scared, then you start to realize, all right, maybe my life is a little different than other people's. I don't know. But it was cool. I mean, it was a neat old house. I mean, it was, from the, 1800s, 1860s or 70s or whatever. It had a secret room, which I didn't know about. Like, it was literally a secret room that I discovered one day when I was outside my house, and I looked up and I was like, where's that window go to? So I got the ladder out and I put it up, and sure enough, there was a sealed off room on the second floor, and my dad was like, oh yeah, we just don't use that. And I'm like, well, why don't we use that? What happened there? But no, it was fun. I mean, one of the defining characteristics though is that, as the youngest of 3 children, and always, I'm told, the most rambunctious of them, we had to be quiet a lot. If there was a service going on downstairs, it's like, oh, there's a service, you have to be quiet. And that's very difficult. Especially when your older brother is torturing you or dangling you over something or tickling you and telling you, be quiet, and trying not to scream. So.
Now I have to. This is fascinating. Now, did you and your brothers, your siblings, ever do anything like be in another room and kind of make ghost sounds with the when the people were visiting for a wake?
No, we never did anything for that. But my brother did. He was the classic sort of prankster. He would try to get my sister to freak out. So he would do things like, and this is back before we had iPods and everything. So it was the old tape recorder with a cassette player and it, stick under her bed. And like all of a sudden it's playing the noise from Friday the 13th or something. And she would just scream. Which was funny at the time. Now it sounds really cruel, and I don't recommend people do that. But
Wow. I went to high school with one of my buddies' dads was a funeral director on the opposite side of Boston. And I do have this very fond memory of going to the drive-in theater. It was his turn to drive, and the only car that was available for us to go in was the hearse. So we showed up, and the soccer team was in the back of the hearse.
Well, there was one time. So I was probably in a junior or senior in high school, and my parents were away, and my grandfather, who had been in the business and was semi-retired. He helped out when my parents were away. He was sort of in charge during this time, and I was helping him out. So someone had passed away, and our job was to go to the person's house and, pick up the body, put it in the hearse, and bring it to the funeral home. And so he had me drive, and then we got out, and I realized I had locked the keys in the hearse. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So my grandfather's like, I'll take care of it. So he goes inside and he's like, I'll just talk to them. You run back home. And it was about 1.5 miles, middle of the night. You run back home, get the spare set of keys, come back, and, they won't even know. So I did. I ran as fast as I could in the middle of the night, got the keys, came back, thought I was all cool and calm. And I walk in and my grandfather says, did you get the keys? So he had told them, everything. And, years later when my grandfather passed away, I was standing in line at the memorial service, and this woman I didn't recognize come up, and she says, you probably don't remember me, but you locked the keys in the hearse on the day that you were picking up so-and-so. I was like, oh.
Oh, man. Well, this is fantastic. I have to know that, so growing up in the funeral home and being so close to Salem, I can't wait for you to tell us what the Witches of Willow Cove is all about. Who are we going to meet in this novel?
So it's an upper middle grade novel, meaning the characters are a little bit older than, typical middle grade, which tends to be 8 to 12 years old, and they're a little bit younger than typical young adult, which is 16, 17, 18. So my characters, are all 13 years old. It's the first in a trilogy, and in each book they're going to get a year older, so it's going to be 13, 14, 15. And the two main characters are Abby Shepherd and Robbie O'Reilly, and they are best friends who, have lived next to each other their whole lives. And they get it in their head that they need to, they want to go explore this old haunted, or allegedly haunted, state mental hospital that's up on a hill in their town. And so they go up there on Halloween to explore, and they encounter a woman who, does not want them there. And a few things happen, and it turns out, as they're escaping, in full costume, dressed as witches and wizards, they are escaping over a cliff, and it turns out Abby accidentally learns that she can fly on that day. And so they escape on her broomstick, and come to find out that Abby is descended from a long line of, or descended from someone, we don't know exactly who, in Willow Cove, but there are 5 other girls who exhibit similar powers, and they form a coven, and they are taught by the woman that they meet on that hill that first night, who may or may not have their best interests at heart. So they form a little coven, and then, meanwhile, Robbie, who's Abby's best friend, is sort of exploring this mystery on the side because he thinks that this woman who's teaching Abby and her friends, may be responsible for the disappearance of, his mother years ago. So, it's told in alternating perspectives from Abby and Robbie, and it's sort of a mystery and a thriller and a magical adventure all tied together in one.
I love how you started with that Abby accidentally discovered that she was able to fly.
Yeah, that was a fun scene to write. It was, I tend to be someone who kind of plots loosely and then, fills in the blanks as I go. And that was actually not intended to be the first scene, but it was sort of one of my writing philosophies is I get to a certain point in a scene and I say, well, what's the most exciting thing that could happen at this point? And then I write it and I'm like, okay, well, that actually really worked. So now I'm going to now that blows up the whole, plot, but I guess I'm going to keep going this way. So, it's a philosophy that has led me to, I think, a lot of sort of cliffhangery type chapters and writing myself into some corners and then really challenging myself to write myself out. So, it's a fun way to go about it.
That's cool. Talk about if you could, the rush. I think I talked here on the show, when I'm performing my educational magic shows, there are moments where I'm in front of a certain audience and just magical stuff happens and things start coming out of me and ideas and stories and routines that I have no idea where they come from. I have a lovely memory of when my daughter was on stage with me when she was in the 3rd grade, and she performed with me a lot, and there was this one night we're in front of a college group and we're on stage and I just started riffing and it was hilarious, and my daughter's on stage with me going, what are you doing? This isn't in the show. And I'm like, just trust me, kid, go with me. Talk about that, how that feels when you're in that kind of flow and rhythm and ideas are coming and you're not quite sure where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I always say that that writing is the only thing that when I'm doing it, I don't think I should be doing something else. Like, I really enjoy it. And, it's sometimes it's a struggle and sometimes it's just phenomenal when everything is just flowing. And I find that, so I have this weird trick because I'm an editor by nature. Professionally, I've been an editor for 20 years. And so I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And I used to try to, write a perfect first draft. And, I get my first draft of this chapter done and I never have to look at it. And so needless to say, I didn't write very good books because, you can't, for me personally, you can't write that way. And so, the trick that I play on myself is this weird psychological trick where I change the font color and size when I'm drafting so it doesn't look like the final version. And it gives me this freedom to just be like, well, let's see what happens and just kind of type with abandon and, and any idea that comes, you're like, all right, well, maybe that'll work. If it doesn't, I'll get rid of it later. And you just kind of let it flow. And it is sort of this adrenaline rush when everything is flowing really well. And, and I find that it's not just the scene that I'm working on. Like when I'm writing like that, all of a sudden ideas for other things are coming in, and like down the line, maybe this will happen. And then, in the sequel, this would be great. And it's just, it's kind of hard to keep track of all of it when the ideas are really flowing that way.
Yeah, keeping track of things. I'm always amazed with authors who are writing fantasy, that you've created this universe and all these kind of rules and physics, and how do you keep that all in line? Do you have like little note cards, or And
I have note cards. I have digital voice notes. I have scraps of paper. I send myself texts. And in fact, so when I went through the editing process of this book with my publisher, the editor actually sent me back, like, here's your story Bible. And it was like, okay, this character has this color hair and is known for this. And I was like, oh my God, I should have had this from the beginning. This is amazing. But yeah, I mean, keeping track, it's what I like to do when I sit down to write in the morning, because I get up every morning and I write from 5 to 7, rain or shine, no matter what, because that's my writing time. And the first thing I do as I'm sipping my coffee is I read through the previous chapter and whatever sort of has been left unfinished from the previous day, to get myself back in the frame of mind. And then throughout the day afterwards, because I've worked on it in the morning, I'll be doing, anything random. I'll be doing the dishes, or I'll be going for a walk. And I feel like more ideas just kind of come because it's been sitting in my subconscious in the morning and I've been working on it. So that's when I'll send myself a text or whatever, just to kind of keep track of it. And then I have a document where I'll plop some ideas in and kind of organize by theme or by plot element or character.
You mentioned making that transformation from editor to writer, and that when you were first writing, you would try to write that perfect first draft, and that wasn't allowing you to be a good creative writer. That technique that you said, that we write with a different font and color so that it doesn't look finished. Where did that idea come from? Because we have a lot of authors who listen to the show. That might be a tip that is really helpful for them.
I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure I came up with it on my own. And I have seen people, suggest using a font like Comic Sans or something, which is a really distracting font, but that it really kind of, lets you know that this isn't finished. But more, I think it actually came to, I have this sort of macabre sense that, like, what if something went wrong and, I dropped dead, and then someone goes to look at my manuscript and they're like, oh my God, he didn't think this was good, did he? Like, no, I want you to know, like, this wasn't the good stuff. This was the experimental stuff. So if you see it like that, don't publish that, or don't judge me for what I wrote there. I was just trying some stuff out.
And you mentioned another tip, just in passing, that I think if there are any aspiring authors out there, you set up a discipline, a routine. You have a time every day where you get up and you write, and that's the time that you write. How important is that?
That is the most important thing that I've ever done as a writer. For years, I would try to squeeze in time, after work or late at night or whatever, when I could. And I thought I was being disciplined, and I thought I was, making the time that I needed. But I could go, days at a time, and then it's hard to jump back in. And I would also give myself word count goals, and that wasn't working for me either. And what I discovered, it was a friend who suggested it's called the 5 a.m. Writers Club. It's basically, it's a Twitter hashtag, but you get up in the morning, you log in, on Twitter, you say, I'm here, you're holding yourself accountable. And there's a whole group of us that are doing this 5 a.m. writing. And, so there is that sort of sense of community as well. But the importance of the consistency of sitting down every day and absorbing yourself in your story. And some days I write 2,000 words in those 2 hours, and some days I write a paragraph. And I tell myself to just be satisfied with whatever comes out. And that is what brought me from aspiring author to published author, is that level of commitment.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We had so much fun talking about you growing up in a funeral home. I got to ask you, what's the craziest or the most fun Halloween memory that you have?
Wow. So many. Yeah, I mean, I think actually my favorite memories are actually more as a parent watching my kids. So, my parents, because we lived in a funeral home, but it was also a business, they were not into decorating the house and making it look spooky because for whatever reason, they thought that would be bad for business. So, that was sort of a constant source of disappointment that we couldn't do parties and do crazy stuff. But, as a parent, seeing my kids go out and have these crazy, just run around in groups of friends and go from house to house while the rest of us parents kind of linger at a safe, cool distance behind, it just sort of reminds me of the sort of reckless abandon of, being a kid on Halloween and just the excitement and the costumes and the cool, crisp air and all of that. And so my story, The Witches of Willow Cove, actually opens on Halloween. That's Abby's birthday. She's a Halloween baby. She's turning 13 on Halloween. And I did that intentionally because I think it is the greatest holiday. And it's so closely tied now with Salem. And my story is set in a fictional town that's adjacent to Salem, much like the one that I live in and where I grew up. And it's a lot of the same history with Salem as well.
Yeah, wow, so cool. Now, you mentioned that this is a trilogy. Do you have the whole kind of trilogy mapped out in your mind, or are you just kind of going to go with it the same way you write?
I have the whole thing worked out, and already I'm about 2/3 of the way into the first draft of the second book, and things are kind of changing as we go, as they naturally do, but I have always sort of known where I wanted to take the story, where I wanted the characters to start and where I wanted them to end up, and sort of the overarching element of it. And so I sort of envisioned The Witches of Willow Cove, the first book, as almost like a really good pilot episode of a TV show. I wanted to establish the world, the stakes, there was sort of something to do, someone, an enemy to overcome in the first book, but really kind of slowly throughout you're revealing that there's more going on behind the scenes, that it's a much wider world than just this one little town where things are happening. And so the exciting part of writing the sequel is I now get to explore all of the other things that I set up in the first book that were sort of left hanging at the end, where it's a complete story, but at the end you have a sense that there is maybe some more sort of bad things about to happen, and the second book really jumps right into that.
This sounds like a great book, an absolutely great book for young teens to read, but it also sounds like a great book to read together. The Reading with Your Kids podcast, we've really encouraged families with kids of all ages to read together, whether it's snuggled up on the couch. You're probably not going to snuggle up with your 13-year-old to read aloud. But this is certainly would be a great read-aloud book, but it would absolutely be a great co-read book where parents and kids are reading this together and then coming together and talking about it on the way to school, or, well, no one goes to school anymore. But, whenever you have that free time in the car or taking a walk or just sitting down and having dinner, this would be something great to have a conversation about.
I hope so. I mean, I wrote it with the intention of it being something that, kind of like the Marvel movies. The kids love it, but the parents love it too. And I wanted this to be a story that would have something for everyone. So it is upper middle grade. It's also sort of been read as a young adult. And I have had many parents tell me that they enjoyed it, genuinely enjoyed it, which has been, was my goal. As someone who has, my son is 13 and my daughter is 11, I've read with them for years and years and years. And we have sort of transitioned from read alouds to co-reading, as you mentioned. And my son has introduced me to a whole bunch of books that I never would have found on my own that he's read, and he's like, Dad, you have to read this. The current one that we're reading that he's read that he's now like, Dad, you got to read this is the Lockwood and Co. books by Jonathan Stroud. that is, one of my sincerest hopes is that parents and kids will both read this and have a lot to talk about, much in the same way that I do with my kids.
Yeah. And you really get a lot out of that time that you're spending with your kids.
Definitely. One of my favorite memories as a kid is when I was younger, second, third, fourth grade, I actually struggled to read. And I thought that, there must be something wrong with me. Why am I not good at this? Why don't I enjoy it? And so my mom at that time said, you know what? I'll read every book you read, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. And, just to, and we still do it, but I mean, she probably read a whole bunch of books that were way outside of her interest level as I was reading, Dragonlance and Tolkien and all this other stuff as I got older. But she read every book that I read, and we talked about it. And, she's probably the reason that I'm a writer today, because she always knew that I liked stories. And that was a great way to sort of for us to bond, and also for me to discover a love of reading. And share it with the parent.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Hey, Josh, I want everybody to be able to find out more about the Witches of Willow Cove and find out more about you. So where can folks go online to connect with you?
Just go to willowcove.com, and that has links to purchase the book. I have a little blog there that I keep sort of update people, and has links to all of my social media profiles as well.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Witches of Willow Cove, a fantastic upper middle grade novel that you and your kids will absolutely adore. And we've been speaking with the author, Josh Roberts. Josh, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have a special Halloween treat for you. 9 members of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors Group are going to be with us to present an original story. And this is a republication of a show that first aired early on in the podcast life. We invited 9 members of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors, including Sarah Cannon, Samantha M. Clark, S.A. Larson, David Nielsen, Kim Ventrella, Jonathan Rosen, to create an original story based on a prompt that I gave them. Each one of the 9 authors took turns writing a section, and they'd write a section and pass it on to the next author, next author. It's a really, really fun and spooky story that is perfect for Halloween. Then we got a chance to meet with the authors afterwards, too. You're not going to want to miss it. It's really, really fun. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a great children's book, we would love to help you tell the world about it. We have all sorts of great new programs at readingwithyourkids.com. We have a great newsletter where we are featuring different books. We are creating book lists. Of course, you could be a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have live events when we're not in pandemic lockdown. We also have a certified great read program. Just so much there to help and support authors and also families. Readingwithyourkids.com is a great place to go and find a great book to add to your family library. We would love to see you there, readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Josh Roberts. I want to thank my team, starting with my daughter, Alejandra Doherty, my producer, Fatima Khan, my author, ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.